give it a shake, 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 and let's hope this is a metaphor for shaking up the England cricket team. And if you're an England supporter, here's to a slightly better performance at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Cheers.
Welcome back to Cricket and Cocktails. This is the fourth Ashes Test review, and we're just 2 days on from England's consolation win against Australia at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. It's their first win on Australian soil since the Sydney Test match of January 2011. England had the opportunity to bowl first on a grassy Melbourne wicket. They bowled Australia out on first innings for 152. Australia responded by bowling England out for 110, and it would have been far less than that but for an enterprising innings of 41 from Harry Brook. There was still time before the end of play on day one for 1 over of Australia's second innings, and we saw the unusual sight of Boland, who normally bats at 11, opening the batting with Travis Head. Travis Head was at the other end. Boland saw off the over. He got a 4 off the last ball down to deep third, and Australia started day two 46 runs in front with 10 second innings wickets in hand. But they didn't kick on. They were bowled out for 132. Josh Tongue took 7 wickets in the match. Bryden Cast took 4 wickets in that second innings, 3 wickets for Ben Stokes. And the victory target was 175. Zach Crawley and Ben Duckett got England off to a great start. They put on 51 just inside of 7 overs. And from that point, even though England did lose wickets in clusters as they got closer and closer to the target, it always felt like England were going to get over the line this time. Harry Brook settled matters with a deflection off his thigh pad from a slightly wayward ball from Jai Richardson. That disappeared for byes, and England won by 4 wickets. I'll be discussing the result and what it could mean for the future of this England cricket team, not just for the final test in Sydney, but beyond that, and also about the suitability of this Melbourne surface for Test cricket. So let's get to it.
Alan, John, thank you very much for joining me on Cricket and Cocktails. Under normal circumstances, had this Melbourne Test match gone the distance, we'd be talking about day 4, but that turned out to be obsolete. It ended in 2 days. I'd like to get your reaction to the result and your views on the suitability or otherwise of this Melbourne deck for Test cricket.
Well, I think in terms of the result, if you're England, you take what you can get. I don't think you can read an awful lot into it. I suspect the Australians were demob happy having won the Ashes because there was very little space between the 2 games, and they'd probably been, as the rugby player Gareth Chilcott once said, having a quiet drink and 15 loud ones in between it. Therefore, may not have been quite ready to get on the field. I think it's harder to judge the suitability of this pitch than it normally would be, simply because the Australians were demob happy and probably thought that if it came down to a low scoring game, they'd beat England anyway because England's batting was awful. And England weren't going to play any differently on it, whatever it was. It could have been the flattest deck in the world or hooping around all over the place, and they would still have thrown the bat at every ball anyway because that's the only thing we ever do. So hard to judge quite how bad it was. I suspect it wasn't as bad as the uncovered pitches of yesteryear, but hard to tell. Regardless of how entertaining people think it was or it wasn't, it dilutes the product. It makes the product less necessary, and it costs Cricket Australia, in this case, an awful lot of money because they basically lost 3 days of revenue of what would have been a sellout. And that's incredibly damaging to the sport going forwards.
Alan, we know that there were 10 millimetres of grass on this Melbourne wicket. The year before, when India came to Melbourne, there was 7 millimetres of grass, and that match went on into 5 days. Does that really make such a massive difference, that extra 3 millimetres of grass?
Well, apparently, I mean, that seems to be what people are saying. I don't think the pitch, from what I saw, looked... I've seen far worse pitches?
I have.
I mean, you're going to put me on the spot and try and remember individual games, which I'm not
I've
going to
got
be
a
able to
couple
do.
for you,
But
no,
you
you
know,
go.
if you look at the way people were out, this was nothing like, for example, the abandoned pitch in Jamaica all those years ago with Ambrose and
Oh, yeah.
Walsh, you know, and Alex Stewart's hands being bashed and battered about and bouncing from a length and all of that. We didn't really see anything shooting along the deck or sort of taking off unexpectedly. This was just good bowling, two teams that are bowling much better than they're batting, and two batting lineups that are low on confidence and you could argue low on skill in tougher conditions. Players have got to be able to adapt to different conditions. I think Ben Stokes, I mean, I'm surprised he wasn't fined for this actually, but he was quite right to say if this had been in other, you know, parts of the world, there would have been all sorts of noise. But people have got to be able to adapt and play in different conditions. But I also agree with John. You can't have test matches ending in 2 days like that. But that probably reflects more the skill of the batting units. So probably in answer to your original question, yes, probably 3 millimeters against batting of this level does make quite a difference. It shouldn't, but it did in you know this case. But hey, you know, we've wanted England to play better and to win, so we will, as John says, take what we can get. I had a stinking cold over Christmas, and this was, you know, a real ray of joy watching this to try and sort of get over it. But the match had finished long before the cold had gone, I'm afraid. Anyway,
Yeah, so I think an England win beats lozenges and eucalyptus any day, really,
indeed.
doesn't it? But I do have a couple of examples of pitches that I actually saw in real time in televised matches. Now, you both might remember this. Edgbaston, England versus West Indies, 1995, where you had the extraordinary sight of a big patch of green on the middle of the wicket, which was shaved normally at either end. So everyone, of course, targeted the big patch in the green wicket. And the first ball, I think, whizzed over the keeper's head for 4 byes. And the other pitch I had in mind was actually in the same year, and this involved Australia and West Indies in Trinidad, where Ian Healy said in his book that the pitch was so grassy and a little bit damp, you could run your finger on it and little patches of grass would get stuck to your finger. Now, in both instances, that was not only a difficult pitch, but a dangerous pitch. And both matches went into a third day. And here you had a pitch that was admittedly grassy and admittedly had quite lavish movement off the seam. But in Australia's second innings, only Travis Head and Steve Smith faced more than 30 balls. Cam Green faced 29, and we can go on to that in a minute. I think he was quite lucky to face that many, to be honest. But how bad was this strip, and to what extent can we put it down to dodgy technique, but also impatience?
Alan is right that there are technical deficiencies. However, I think if you're on a pitch which is in the bowler's favour, what you have to do as a batter is to be mentally strong enough to confront the challenge. Australia weren't particularly mentally strong because they put a huge amount into the first 3 test matches and won all of them, and therefore won the Ashes. So they were caught breathing out, if you like. They were caught taking a collective, well, that's that job done. Therefore, any deficiencies in the pitch were overexposed at that point because they weren't quite mentally tuned in to the game. In England's case, mentally, the vast majority of them only have one mode anyway, and seeing a pitch of that ilk would have said to the majority of them, the only way to play this pitch is to do what we always do and be as aggressive as possible. As was the case in the first test match in Perth, they weren't chasing that many, and they thought to themselves, if we get off to a quick enough start, the Australians are not that bothered anyway, and therefore we will get to a point where they will realise that they're not going to win, and the game will run away from them, and that's exactly what happened.
You use the phrase John D. Mob happy. Of course, it would be reasonable to say England weren't completely and utterly teetotal themselves going into the fourth Test match, but they nonetheless had some motivation to get something out of what's been a very, very difficult tour. Harry Brook took a massive risk in the first innings where he eventually scored 41, but in that first ball, he charged at Mitchell Starc, didn't he? Tried to slap him into the offside, and he was lucky not to get a flying edge somewhere. Was that the right approach, just to do it quickly and wipe out any hope of an Australian win to go 4-0 up? Was that the right tactic from England on that surface?
Well, the result tells you that it was. I think it was really the only way. I think, as John says, that most of them have only got that one mode anyway. Whether it's a final hurrah or it will lead on to a glorious win in Sydney, time will tell. But it was quite clear, especially in that fourth innings, they were only ever going to go for it. What do you do when you've had three scores in the game of 150 or less? You lay your ears back and kind of hope for the best, really. And that's basically what they did. I thought Duckett looked a lot more comfortable in that last innings. Yeah. He looked more comfortable than he's done the whole tour, because rather than having the sort of, I want to play like this, but I don't quite know if if the media and the situation will condemn me if I get it wrong. The thinking seemed very clear, and the output therefore was clear as well. I'm not sure. This bit about Australia being not entirely focused. I actually think Stuart Broad was right when he said this is the weakest Australian team for 15 years. That's not to say it's a bad side, but they're nowhere near in the class of the team of 4 or 8 years ago, or whatever. And I think it just shows kind of what might have been for England, because this batting lineup, for me, it's probably the weakest Australian batting lineup I've ever seen. You've got guys over the hill, or not good enough, or out of form, and the only two really holding it together are Travis Head and Alex Carey.
Steve Smith, I thought, batted with great patience, more patience than we saw from anyone else in the Australian 11 after Travis Head got out. But I never really got the sense from him that he was really going to keep things ticking over, because, first of all, he wasn't getting enough support at the other end. And his scoring options seemed to be quite limited because of the way England bowled at him. And when it was Australia's turn to bowl, Mitchell Starc, who overall has had an outstanding series, he was a little bit leg side to Duckett early on. And then Duckett was able to get a little bit of a start and batted with increasing confidence. So I think these are some of the issues that confronted the Australian 11, an Australian 11 that might change a little bit in Sydney and could change really quite substantially between now and the summer of 2027. Would you say, John, that there are one or two Australian players that really just aren't good enough to be there? What changes would you make, not necessarily for Sydney, but going ahead to 2027 in England?
I agree with Alan that really only Travis Head and Carey have enhanced their reputation amongst the batters. Smith looks to be a man coming to the end of his tenure. He looks as if he's less able to impose himself on a scenario and is becoming something of a survivor, really. Khawaja only really got into the series because other people were not available. Green's a reasonable player, but of no super quality, really. They've clearly got a problem at the top of the order, because Weatherall doesn't convince me at all. One of the reasons why they got found out in Melbourne was because in Josh Tongue, you have an England bowler who targets the stumps. He actually targets the stumps. And therefore, if there's some movement to be had, if you're targeting the stumps, you've only got to beat the inside or the outside edge by a fraction of an inch, and the batter is in trouble. The problem is we haven't had enough bowlers who have targeted the stumps. Carter's got a lot of wickets, but he's chucked it all over the pitch. Therefore, to somebody like Travis Head, that's just like, well, let's just make hay, because if you're going to bang it in, what we know about Australian players is on the cut and the pull, they're very, very good. In terms of their attack, I mean, Starc has been magnificent. in the series. You
Yes.
have to say that. He's been absolutely magnificent. He's not going to go on forever. He's, what is he, 37?
He's
now?
35 now. He
Yeah,
will
he's
be
35
36
now.
next week, I think.
38 next series. That's questionable. Cummings is a magnificent bowler. No question. He's a magnificent bowler. But there are question marks over his fitness, as there have been in this series. Lyon hasn't had a huge contribution to the series, but again, he's a top-class spin bowler, and when spin bowling was needed, he delivered. But they're certainly going to have to hunt for some batters to bring to England, without a doubt.
I think one of the issues Australia may have going forward, Alan, is one of the reasons why Cameron Green is in the side, apart from the fact that he's an absolutely terrific fielder, he adds a little bit of an extra option with the ball. He gives you that bit of extra cover if one of your frontline bowlers is not quite on it, or heaven forbid picks up some sort of niggle or some sort of injury. But one of the problems he's got is technically he's been exposed. Ben Stokes in particular, bowling at him in the second innings after Atkinson limped off injured, he kept having him on several occasions falling over outside the line of off stump, and eventually he fenced at one and was caught behind. Is there a possibility for Australia to make a change even as early as Sydney and bring in another batting all-rounder such as Beau Webster? And does Cam Green, for you, make it on the plane to England in 2027?
Oh, I hope he makes it on the plane to England in 27, because I think he's a walking wicket. He gets planted on that front foot very, very, very early. I mean, the bowler hasn't even reached his delivery stride, and this great front foot is already set. He's then got nowhere to go because the foot's already planted, so he's stuck, and he either, as John said, sort of ends up playing round it, or he ends up fencing outside off stump, because he can't then readjust his position. And I think in England that sort of technique would be absolutely hopeless. It's been pretty hopeless in this series. He's averaged, I had the figures here, I think it's 18.66 with the bat in this series. He's not a good enough bowler to be in the side, averaging 18.66 with the bats. I've been amazed that Beau Webster hasn't been in the team ahead of him, who's a much better bowler and must be at least as good a batsman. I think they will keep him for Sydney, probably. I think Beau Webster and Inglis, they released from the squad to go and play in the Big Bash. I think they're rejoining the squad at the weekend. That gives you a clue that they're not sort of front and centre at the forefront of their mind to be chosen for this next game. But no, Cam Green, I don't think his technique is up to it at this level. And I think he needs, from Australia's point of view, to go away, back to Shield cricket, improve his batting technique. And he's clearly got talent. As you said, Ben, he's a brilliant fielder. And he would help to balance that side, but not averaging 18.66, he won't.
Yeah, no, bit shorter runs. There's going to have to be some sort of changes to the Australian bowling attack going to 2027. Switching to the England bowling attack, I think it's reasonable to say, is it not, John, that Josh Tongue has played himself into this into the rest of this series. He must be certain to play at Sydney. I thought the ball he bowled to Steve Smith, and one of Steve Smith's idiosyncrasies is he shows you what the ball did after it got him out. And after he was bowled in the first innings, he did this, indicating that the ball had pitched on the seam and moved away from him to take out his off stump. And it goes back to what you were saying about him targeting the stumps and moving the ball around off a really testing length. And now that Gus Atkinson is injured, he's got a hamstring problem, and he's not going to rock up for Sydney. How important is Josh Tongue's bowling to the England 11, not just for the rest of this series, but going forward?
I think weirdly, they decided against Tongue in the beginning because they didn't feel he was accurate enough. And strangely, he's proved to be more accurate than anybody else. The thing we knew about Tongue at the start of the series was that he cleans up the tail, which is very important in Test cricket because you don't want a tail hanging around. He's pretty quick. He's not Archer quick, but then not many people are. If you're going to build a bowling attack around a pair of bowlers, then I would have thought Archer, if he's fit, and Tongue are probably now the first two names that you look at, I would say, going forward. That's not to say that I think Atkinson is out of the picture. I think
no.
Atkinson, when he's fit, will be very much to be considered. England have major issues heading into 2027. One of them is that they need to get back to respecting the county game, which they don't.
Yeah.
They need to find a wicket keeper who keeps wicket regularly for his county, because Smith does not. And that has found him out in this series, because it's very difficult to keep wicket in a very intense series of this level when you don't do it normally, and then be expected to come out and bat properly in the way that they want him to. So they have to decide with Smith, is he good enough to bat in the top 6? If he isn't, then they have to move on, because they have to have a wicket keeper who keeps wicket for his county. The wicket keeper is the beating heart of the fielding side, and he has to keep everybody else going. So you can't have a wicket keeper who's thinking about, am I about to drop the ball? Or I didn't make many runs when I batted. He's behind the stumps. And he has to have been a wicketkeeper enough times to be able to give the captain the steer on the DRS as well. Because the wicketkeeper is the big call where that's concerned.
Because he has a box seat, doesn't he?
Because he has the box seat. And if you're not a regular wicketkeeper, you're going to get more wrong than somebody that is. Yeah. So whether England go to Ollie Robinson or they go to Rue or somebody like that, if they want to make forward planning, they need to stick one of those boys in and say, right, you've got the job for X amount of time. And clearly they need to look at one or two batters as well. I would be looking at, and this would involve coming away from the Bazball mode, I would be looking at Emilio Gay, who I think is worth having a look at, very much so. I think his form on the Lions tour suggests that if he makes runs in Division 1 at the start of next season, they should be looking at Asa Tribe, who I think is talented. And I think as a longer shot, potentially, if he can back up what he started to do last season, albeit in Division 2, that potentially you could look at Ben Geddes as well.
There's definitely some selection debates for England in the future. And you mentioned Emilio Gay. He must be very close to being on the radar. He's already been out there in Australia for the Lions. Ditto Ben McKinney, who opened the batting with him at Lilac Hill. James Rue has been out there, keeper for Somerset. Ollie Robinson must be quite close. But in the immediate future, England have to make at least one change because Gus Atkinson has a hamstring problem. Is there a possibility for Bashir to play at Sydney, a pitch that traditionally favours a little bit of spin, or would you go for someone like Matty Potts?
I would go for Potts, especially looking at the weather forecast for Sydney. It's glorious sunshine this week, and then the minute we get to 10:30 in the morning on whatever day it is, it's changing to rain. I think we will probably have the same balance of team on the basis that we won't expect Will Jacks to do very much bowling. Thank goodness, some might say. For me, Potts comes in for Atkinson. I don't know why Potts has been missing in action throughout this series. It's been genuinely bizarre. It was also bizarre with what we were saying about Josh Tongue. I would have picked him. I probably would have picked him in the first one. I certainly would have picked him for the day-nighter at the Gabba. The way we let Mitchell Starc, I said in one of these, where we let him bat like Bradman, really. We put everybody back on the field and cast bowled short and wide to him. So you needed a bowler that could wrap up the tail there. He's been one of the few successes of this tour.
Yes.
Tongue has bowled very, very accurately, good movement, decent pace. Please, Lord, stay fit. Nobody seems able to stay fit. I was hearing some comments Brett Lee was making as to why that we've had 3 bowlers now in Wood, Archer, and Atkinson who've not made it to the finishing line, in some cases barely made it past the start. His comment was very much, this is a lack of bowling preparation in Australian conditions. And if we put this out to a wider thing, that has to come back to the management and the preparation, which is why for me, however much we have rose-tinted glasses looking at this performance, and bizarrely, I think England may well win in Sydney, actually. The conditions, I think, will favour the bowlers, which will mean Bazball, in terms of England's batting, comes into play, and the weaknesses in Australia's batting, as we've talked about, will be there. So I think it could very easily end up being 3-2. That mustn't be allowed to mask the complete shambles of this tour, and the way people have been being sent out either to play out of position or having not played at all, really, in the conditions, to give them any chance of acclimatising. But if you've got three bowlers breaking down, that tells you there's something wrong with the preparation. That can't just be bad luck.
I must say, looking at that article that you drew my attention to about Brett Lee, it did remind me, John, about an old phrase from Freddie Truman, who was absolutely adamant that you got fit by bowling rather than sort of running circuits around the pitch or pumping iron in the gym. And the reality is, heading into that first test match in Perth, England hadn't done much bowling, and their bowling has actually got better as the test series has progressed, has it not?
I think we've said before on your podcast, Ben, that England's preparation was frankly laughable. Sending your team to play white ball cricket in New Zealand before an Ashes series is a nonsense, frankly. And again, I've said before, Rob Key should have resigned by now. Where's his resignation? It should be on the table already. The only reason McCullum probably shouldn't be on the table yet is because the tour isn't finished. As soon as it is, his should be on the table as well, because it's a nonsense. I'm sorry, they both have to go.
I don't know what you think, John. I'm not that convinced by keeping Stokes as captain, really. Yes, he's a great cricketer. He's done great things for England. But this nonsense every game of thinking, is he fit to bowl? Can he bowl in this session? The day in Adelaide when he absolutely had to bowl and didn't. I mean, I'm sounding harsh because he's one of the only bowlers who's still fit. But I'm not sure we can have somebody at number 6 who's not getting enough runs, who has made quite clear tactical mistakes in this series, bowling cast with the new ball every time rather than tongue. That's just been an obvious error, and you've got constant worries about his own fitness. So I wonder whether he survives the chop. What price? Are we going to continue this merry-go-round every game of is he fit? Can he bowl in this session? Which part of his body's falling apart now? I wonder if we actually just need to move on and say we've had the cycle to the Ashes. It hasn't worked. And we need a completely fresh approach.
To me, he's an inspirational captain rather than a tactically good one. I think he sometimes sort of rides emotional waves, or he finds a way to conjure something up. But I think day to day, I don't think he's anything special. So again, you come back, as you've alluded, Alan, to the question of, if he's not going to bowl, does he get enough runs to justify a place in the top 6? You have to ask that question. The difficulty for England is, if he's not going to be the Test captain, the current next one on the rank, by virtue of the fact that he's vice captain, is Brook, who has shown absolutely no mental crust at all in the entire series. He's a better player than that, but somehow he's bought into this, you have to smash every ball out the ground, and I don't think that's terribly helpful. The question is, if you go beyond him, there isn't a captaincy candidate amongst the current group.
You give it to Brook, let him kind of learn on the job, because at least we know that he's likely to be fit for every game. He's good enough, obviously, to be in the team. He's likely to be there, and very likely to be there in 4 years' time. And I think a lot of his rather eccentric approach, I think I said this in the last one of these, is more indicative of the failures of those above him okay, coming in at 8 for 3 and playing that horrendous hack in the first innings, it isn't great. But if you're always coming in at 8 for 3 or 30 for 3 or whatever, regardless of whether it's flat or moving or whatever the conditions are, then I do get why he's trying to change the sort of narrative of the game. Yeah, he's obviously got to, refine that and learn. I would probably just move on to him as captain, actually. The other thing I was hearing is, why don't we put Stokes, if there are doubts about his ability to bowl enough overs and if he's not getting enough runs, given he's got a very good sound batting technique, do we move him up to 3? I do hear the argument which says he's got the best technique of the batsman, so put him in that problem position. Or do we just keep Bryden Cast at 3, which was the fun in the last test?
God. Well,
I think it had some sort of logic at the time, but maybe not long term.
That's our answer there, you see.
The trouble is there are really big fundamental questions to be faced. I don't think the current regime has the stomach to face them. If, for instance, and I love Joe, but if you take his century out of this series, he's done nothing. He's done absolutely nothing else in the series at all.
And it's got out very repetitively as well. It's that edge seems to have a magnet on it, doesn't it? I don't know why he keeps doing it, because he must know from three previous tours that doesn't work in Australia.
He's going to be, I don't know, 30 watt when the next series in Australia happens. His record in Australia is not great. We've already proven that. How long is his place cemented for?
Yeah.
Realistically, looking at this team, how many of them can you absolutely confidently say should be in the 11 for the first test of the summer?
Well, that's another conversation we'll have after the Sydney Test match, which starts on January the 3rd. So, gentlemen, I'd like to wish both of you a happy new year and to thank you for your input into this podcast. I'm going to introduce my cocktail now. I've got this here to show you how thick and gooey it is. It's not a fizzy cocktail this time. This is eggnog. And here's one I made earlier. So I'm just going to pour this in here now. So that's eggs whisked together with sugar.
Looks like Bailey's, Ben, or something like that.
You could add Bailey's to it. I personally, I've added rum along with cinnamon and nutmeg. And I have to say,
yum.
It is absolutely marvellous. I'll send you the recipe. But thank you very much for your attention on this podcast. Happy New Year. And we'll talk again after Sydney.
It's not a fizzy cocktail this time. Let me get that out the way straight away. This is a traditional eggnog recipe. And here's some eggnog mix that I've made earlier. This particular batch is enough for 3 servings. And to make my eggnog mix, I've taken 3 egg yolks and I've whisked it until it's fluffy and gooey with half a cup of sugar. I've also heated up 1 cup of milk with 1 whole clove and a pinch of cinnamon until the milk is hot and steamy but not boiling. And then I've combined the hot milk with the egg mixture. And you have to do that very carefully and whisk as you go, because otherwise it gets all lumpy and nobody wants that. Since then, that's been chilling for an hour. And all I'm going to do now is add half a teaspoon of vanilla extract, half a teaspoon of nutmeg, and 1 tablespoon of rum. So we pour that into our eggnog mix, give it a little stir, then we pour it into our suitably festive mug, and that's it. Until next time in Sydney, thank you very much for joining me on Cricket and Cocktails. Happy New Year, and cheers. That's a wrap here on Cricket and Cocktails. We will return after the 5th Test match. That starts in Sydney on Saturday. That's on January the 3rd. And I wonder how much grass will be left on that surface, possibly a bit less than we saw in Melbourne. We'll find out soon enough, but in the meantime, my thanks to Alan Bone and John Batham for their fantastic insight into this test review, my thanks to Adobe, and my thanks to simplyrecipes.com for the lovely eggnog recipe, which I will certainly be using again and again and again. Happy New Year, and goodbye for now.